In this video, we've compiled the ultimate wish list for Gran Turismo 8, whenever that gets released. There's no doubt that Gran Turismo 7 made waves in the sim racing world when it was released. Dynamic weather, true track evolution, and incredible graphics and hyper-realistic ray tracing, and not forgetting the endless immersion of PSVR2, which on first experience feels like actual reality more than it does virtual reality. It is that good. However, it's now been 3 years since Gran Turismo 7 was released, which realistically means we're probably closer to the release of Gran Turismo 8 in the future than we are the release of Gran Turismo 7 in the past. So with that, we have asked our community, what are the main things that you would love to see on Gran Turismo 8? And in this video, right at the end, I'm going to be sharing my top 5 wish list features for Gran Turismo 8. Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to try and group these comments by the themes, and the first thing that was on everyone's radar is the penalty system. Mahim says, if they only change one thing about Gran Turismo and it is the penalty system, it would be a completely different game. Now that I absolutely agree with. And Slip says, just 2 things to change: the DR and SR system and damage. I would make it so that the DR cannot be earned unless your SR is at least A. I kind of agree with this as well, because we see a lot of dirty drivers working their way up the ranks and ending up in the AA plus lobbies when they are absolute pure filth drivers. So we want to do something to try and avoid that. Now, Slip also says that damage and penalties should only be served in the pits. Now, I kind of agree with this. The penalty system of just stopping on track randomly does feel a little bit strange, but I guess that's the only way in a 4 or 5 lap race for Daily Race B sometimes. That's kind of the only way that you can serve that. So I think overall the penalty system needs a little bit of a rethink. I do agree with more realistic damage in some categories of the daily races, which we're going to get into. Now, before we get on to any kind of racing, one of the main bits of feedback, certainly in Gran Turismo 7 currently, and the wish list for Gran Turismo 8 is the cars and tracks. The 2 things that make any sim racing game. Now, Cubby on Cars says a better back catalogue of cars. So there's a lot of people wanting the newer cars, the absolute latest and greatest cars, but actually Cubby's saying here, can we actually have a back catalogue of cars? Get that they are limited with licenses and the like, that is very true, but there are so many cars that are missing, and I feel it would be brilliant in GT8. Laura says it would be good to see Vauxhall on it. Don't be silly, Laura. Don't say silly things. You will regret it. I've watched too much Top Gear to be a fan of Vauxhall. I do agree, though, that some of those everyday cars, it would be great to see them on there. I do feel like when they do an update, however, and then they say new cars, we do obviously complain when there is a lot of, day-to-day running normal, actual real normal cars on there as well. And I think that's because we can't race them, or we feel like we can't do too much with them. And so I do understand people's frustration with that all the same. Aaron says, I would like to be able to race any spec car in my garage and use them in the daily. So he's talking about tuning here, being able to bring a normal car or a race car of some degree up and amongst and fighting against the different categories. Now, even Aaron says as well that this might stop the one-make races that we are seeing so often in Gran Turismo 7, and in fact, that is something else that needs fixed in Gran Turismo 8. I do feel the struggle is Gran Turismo 7 in itself and Gran Turismo 8 will be even better in tuning. Gran Turismo 7 is incredibly detailed when it comes to the tuning, and I think a lot of people, myself included here by the way, struggle to really understand the difference that the tuning makes. And I think if we are going to go down that route, that is a feature of the game that really needs looked at to allow everybody to have a good understanding, make a good tuning, and see firsthand the impact that is going to make on their car, make the best decisions in the garage, and put it out on track. Moving on to then actual racing, online racing lobbies, and of course the daily races. Now, you're probably going to predict some of the comments in this one, but let's get into it. First up is John Fitch, one of our longest and most loyal subscribers to the channel, an absolute legend. We need way more tracks. First off, going to absolutely agree with that, but most of all here, a race D, which fills a 1-hour slot. He's also said realistic damage in the lobbies. Agree with this. A daily race D, I think, is what we feel is missing, or we need to make daily race C the endurance race. I think having a race that is a 1-hour long slot, it's not enough when it just comes round on the Nations Cups and manufacturers, because it's so easy to miss those races. They're once a week for a couple of weeks, and then that season is finished. We don't manage to get fully immersed in a full-length race that has the weight and realism of real damage as well, which is what John's mentioned. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Cerro Bueno says, all I want is for someone at Polyphony Digital to understand the full potential of Gran Turismo and to fulfill it. Rather than using the same old tracks and weather or lack of it, agreed. I don't agree with the more cars and more tracks comments. I see where they're going with this. We have plenty of them, but it seems that we only have half of what's available because the guys in charge have little imagination. Now, that is a little bit brutal, but I absolutely do agree. I've lost count now of the amount of times we've seen Trial Mountain, for example, in the daily races. I know it's a Gran Turismo original track, but there are so many amazing tracks that we very rarely get to see. Overall, there are a lot of comments asking for a daily race D. Now, that isn't necessarily always the solution or the best solution when we get on to Gran Turismo 8. I think what we need is maybe a rethink altogether of the daily races. Now, I agree with keeping them online for the whole week. I don't really think that's a great idea. If I maybe only have 1 hour every couple of nights to jump on and then have to learn and practice a whole new track again, I do agree with keeping them on for a week. But there's just something about them that gets stale very, very quickly. And that's where one of my requests later in the video is going to come in. Another must-have request comes from Grey Young 532, who's actually talking about VR. Now, I've not really used VR, PSVR 2, to its full potential because most of the time it makes me sick very, very quickly. However, I'm starting to get a little bit better and I'm starting to really enjoy Gran Turismo 7 currently in PSVR 2. It is hyper realistic, really, really cool, so immersive, and I could spend now, thankfully, hours without getting sick. But I'm starting to notice the things that bug me a little bit and maybe make me feel out of touch with the race. So Gray has said a heads-up display for VR, and I do think this is one of the main things that we feel is missing. We sit in the car, it feels hyper-realistic, we can see all around us, it feels really, really cool, but then we kind of don't have much information about the car. I know most of it's on the steering wheel, but that's really difficult to see. And then we just kind of feel out of touch with the race, and we're either just waiting for the laps to finish and then find out where we are. And it also feels a little bit weird that all of the details are to our right hand side mostly, but we still have the same dials and heads-up display that we do on the flat screen. I get that it needs to look the same, obviously, but there's so much less information just floating about your right-hand side here than you get racing on the flat screen. Now, it's a bit of a tricky one to fix, but I feel I've got some suggestions. So with that, that is our community section over, and I want to get into what my wish list is for Gran Turismo 8. Let's go. Now, the first thing on my wish list is a fully fledged career mode. Now, what we have on Gran Turismo 7 at the moment is still great, but it feels a little bit loose. It doesn't feel like it has a huge amount of direction. It would be great to have some real-world first-person views trying to build your way through the lower ranks of motorsport, all the way up to the Group 4s, Group 3s, and maybe even something higher than that. And I feel like negotiating contracts is part of motorsport, negotiating sponsorships is part of motorsport, negotiating your way into a driver's seat in the first place is part of motorsport, and most of that then evolves around negotiating your way around a race. I would love to see a fully holistic career mode in Gran Turismo 8, and I can pretty much guarantee you I would love to play that. I'm sure everybody else would as well, and maybe get as much or more enjoyment than that from the daily races. Now, second on my list is a little bit of a technical one, but bear with me. It is more custom vehicle settings when driving, especially when we're looking at hypercars and we're looking at the real top-end racing spec cars, where now, today, in terms of motorsport, we see huge progression and shift towards hybrids. In the hypercars, especially the LMP1 cars, super frustrating in a car like the Audi R18, where it just deploys battery immediately. You do one lap, you've got no battery left. You're then having to literally trail brake on straights. You're having to press the brake on straights just to get battery back into the car. Some custom settings on how that battery is deployed, as well as being able to customize the way the regenerative braking works, i.e. how strong do you actually have those settings? Do you want the regen to kick in immediately and be super aggressive, or do you want it to actually coast into the corners a little bit more? I'm actually more aware of this now that I drive a hybrid car and the flappy paddles are no longer used for gears and actually only regenerative braking. I think this would give us an extra layer of complexity and things to think about in the race. We already have brake balance and fuel maps and things like that, and Gran Turismo does a good job of those, but being able to have that regen braking and really thinking about the battery and having full control over the battery would be amazing. I think Gran Turismo not including these features around the hybrid settings and kind of having that control is going to leave the game behind very quickly. Motorsport is always evolving. The saying goes, if you're not developing, if you're not moving forward, then you're going backwards, let alone standing still. And I think that a few years from now, when Gran Turismo is released, the motorsport world is going to look very different in terms of hybrids, in terms of sustainable fuels. And I think from the moment that Gran Turismo gets released, it's going to really struggle to stay in touch with motorsport over the next 5 years or so, or the lifespan of Gran Turismo. It would be a real shame to see Gran Turismo 8 be released, be amazing as I'm sure it will be, but be very quickly left behind by the real world development of motorsport. So I think really taking a look at the hybrid systems, the setup, and how we can really control that and be immersed and really enjoy that aspect of racing is going to be super important. Anyways, that's the boring technical stuff out the way. Moving on. So we've already had a mention of the heads-up display. Now I've got 2 requests for this one in Gran Turismo 8. The first thing is a customizable heads-up display even on flat screen. I would love to be able to see my fuel map on one side, but then also my track map or maybe it's my brake balance on another. Being able to have 2 things at once rather than just one rotational dial between like the 5 settings would be incredible. Now, the F1 game does a really good job of being able to fully customize your heads-up display and the information that is to hand, but in the PSVR 2 is where this game struggles, so here are my suggestions. Now, the first solution might be a little bit difficult, but for anybody who watches Formula 1, you may be familiar with the overlaid graphics, the animated graphics that they put around the halo. This gives you an insight into what gear the driver's in, the speed that they're traveling at, the corner they're in, or even the G-force that they are pulling. Now, in virtual reality, the heads-up display on the actual wheel is difficult to see. Not only because you're driving, as it would be in the real world, but in the VR goggles and in the VR headset, unless you are looking directly at it, it can be a little bit blurry or pixelated. And you have this urge to kind of like move your head forward to try and see it better, but that doesn't make any difference to what you actually see. Now, in some modern road cars, we have a heads-up display which actually is on the windscreen. This is either, it has this like holographic effect where it's basically beamed up and shined onto a piece of glass or onto the windscreen itself. Something like that, or something like that visual effect could be quite cool in the cars, but it would be fully customizable to Gran Turismo. It would look like a Gran Turismo overlay. I think that would be quite helpful, or even if they put it below the steering wheel, so you kind of like look down where you would maybe see the driver's legs, you would see a little bit of information, but I get at the same time, you wouldn't have that in the real world. So rather than trying to add information, I actually agree with taking it away in the way that they have done. So my request for Gran Turismo 8 is actually take it one step in the opposite direction, go further, go more immersive, take away the information and actually have us rely on some of that with a team radio. Maybe we still have the messages appearing in the left-hand side so that we see an almost F1 type graphic overlay with a radio comms, but to be able to hear this person's gone into the pits, the race leader's now crashed, yellow flag, coming from a race engineer in the same way that we have in iRacing, I believe, and in ACC would be incredible. That way, you're not trying to look at these weird graphics that have sort of been placed in a really inconvenient way. You're not then trying to look at the heads-up display on the wheel, which some of it works, some of it doesn't. To actually have a full race engineer by your side in the race would be unbelievable. Now, in terms of all things realistic and really getting in the headspace for a proper race, here's my request. A proper endurance race. Minimum 1 hour long, maybe it's an hour and a half, maybe it's 2 hours, but let's have multi-team and driver pairing. So I can be racing with my teammate online and we do actual driver swaps. They do it well enough in iRacing as far as I can gather, but to really have that embedded and properly part of Gran Turismo, yes, it may be a thing for custom lobbies, custom races, but that would just be epic. Now, we all know that endurance racing is at its peak when we have multi-class endurance racing, and we've kind of found a few workarounds on the channel where we can do multi-class racing in the private lobbies, but to have proper Gran Turismo events with that built in would be amazing. That is going to be one of my biggest and most important requests that I would love to see on Gran Turismo 8. Now, my fifth and final request for Gran Turismo 8 is something that we actually already have on Gran Turismo 7, but is criminally underused. I think we can see where we're going with this, and that is true dynamic weather, true dynamic timing, and track evolution. Now, Gran Turismo 7 does an amazing job of having the track dry, for example, and showing a real racing line, actual track evolution, which is incredible. Now, if they actually just copy that, move it to Gran Turismo 8, but actually use it in the daily races, job done, I am happy. However, there are a couple of improvements I would love to see. Actually using this in the daily race, I think as standard, daily race A, B and C, if that is the format they stick with, should have all dynamic weather. I would love to see every track having rain, every track having thunderstorms, every track on the game having the ability to experience all weather, rather than just a few tracks that have rain. When it comes to the daily races themselves, I want all of the daily races to be truly random. We could be on daily race B all day and not have a repeatable race. They've done it before, they need to do it again, and they need to actually have that as the foundations, I think, of daily races in Gran Turismo 8. This is going to avoid the current problem that we do have on Gran Turismo 7, which is the daily races getting very stale very quickly. If there's weather involved, we know by lap 3 the rain is going to come, and then we need to go into the pits, and then by lap 7 we can go back onto the slicks, and then we just repeat that race time after time. That can be a little bit frustrating, and even the races where we just have a set amount of tyre wear, a set amount of pit stops, realistically, by the time we've done that race a few times, we've worked out we need to pit on lap 3, change to the softs, and then just run that entire strategy for the entire week. I think there's two things we need to fix here. We need to have race requirements that change maybe each day. We don't really want them to change every single race, but every single day would be amazing. And as we say, true dynamic weather that really makes you think about what's going to happen, what you're going to do, and how you react, and a strategy that really does genuinely change on the fly. And that would just be so much more immersive. It would give us that real racing experience, the real driving simulator that Gran Turismo says that it is. And that is my final request for Gran Turismo 8. That has been my wish list. That has been the wish list of our amazing community, which is almost 3,000 strong at the point of recording this video. So if you've enjoyed this video, and if you've certainly seen your comment popping up in this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I think it's around 80% of our viewers are returning viewers, but not subscribed. So make sure you change that. Hit the subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts on what you would love to see on Gran Turismo 8, and I will see you in the next video.